In a Hardcore Nuzlocke challenge, any Pokemon that faints has to be boxed forever, and I'm gonna try to beat Pokemon X while only using water types. And the Kalos region has a great selection, however a lot of them appear in the same location, greatly reducing the number of encounters in the game since I'm only allowed to catch the first encounter per route. And speaking of encounters, I immediately have two women eagerly awaiting me at the door, which is how you know this is a video game and not my real life. The girls do, however, give me the first choice of starter, and naturally I pick Froakie. Then before the first gym, we can pick up a whole slew of encounters, starting with Pampor in Santaloon Forest. We can then pick up our next encounter immediately on Route 2, which isn't actually a water type, so I won't be able to use her in battle until she evolves into Marill. The same goes for our next encounter on Route 22, the Sinnoh All-Star Bidoof. The good thing about Azrael is we can evolve it as soon as we get it to max happiness. The bad thing about it is mine has thick fat instead of huge power, meaning instead of being the most powerful Pokemon I could have gotten the entire run, it's nothing special at all. The fact that we're still so early in the challenge, I was tempted to just restart to try and get huge power Marill. Call me a victim of the sunk cost fallacy, but I didn't want to spend another half hour running around to raise Azrael's happiness just for a chance at huge power. Besides, Finland just learned Rollout at level 10, which even without huge power increases the damage exponentially. Unless we miss, of course, which resets our damage back to base. And my chunky Marill seems to have a high propensity for doing so. This causes me to lose nearly half of Finland's health before taking Surskit out, and we're gonna need as much health as possible when facing Vivillon's Infestation, which deals extra damage to us at the end of every single turn. Losing here by missing another 90% accurate rollout would be devastating, but at least it gets us another chance of giving Finland huge power. However, even after Vivillon sets up its defense with Harden, we don't end up needing huge power because Finland takes Vivillon out anyway, meaning for now, we're stuck with our high adiposity Marill, but at least we've got our first badge. And with it, our level cap increases quite dramatically, allowing us to evolve Froakie into Frogadier. You know, in actual French restaurants, getting Frog as your starter means something very different. One like on this video equals one prayer for every Sliggoo in Kalos. Once we reach Lumio City, we get our choice of Kanto starter. And look, personally, I'm a Charmander guy. I love Charizard, and Charmander was my first starter ever. Then there's Bulbasaur, who tends to get a bit high on his own supply. But in this challenge, our only choice is of course Squirtle. And don't get me started on Blastoise. In Gen 2, they gave Magnemite, a Gen 1 Pokemon, the Steel type. And at no point did they look at Blastoise and think, yeah, no, that's metal. Then they had the opportunity to set things right with Mega Blastoise. Nope, just water. I then go pick up Ducklet on Route 7, and then make a huge mistake by fishing up a Love Disc with the Old Rod on Route 8, which means I can never get Starmie since it's the only location. Wait, why am I hearing boss music? I had made another grave mistake. In my attempt to get to Solage City, I'd accidentally challenged a trainer with a level 21 Psyduck. And with my usual luck, of course it was raining. After she proved it was the better duck, I sent in Pampor. But because of our difference in level, my water gun barely did anything despite the boost from the rain. And after surviving the following hit at 4 HP, I try to get a paralysis with Lick, but I should have already known that luck wasn't on my side this battle. Once Pampor fell, I tried to get some damage with Love Disc, and reading that line back, I realized why that was a terrible plan. Once again, I entrusted all of my faith in Finland, but when getting hit with Water Pulse, misfortune struck again, confusing Marill. And while I managed to break through confusion with Bubble Beam, it barely did any damage at all. Psyduck deals nearly half of my health with confusion as Finland manages to snap out, but a second Bubble Beam isn't enough to finish Psyduck off. The next confusion has Finland surviving with just 1 HP, meaning once again, it's Thickfat Marill who saves the day. Except we still permanently lost half of our team against female swimmer Guinevere's Psyduck. And after that disaster, I decided to do the necessary leveling to get Marill to evolve to Azumarill and Bidoof into Bibarel. This means we entered the second gym battle versus Grant a lot better prepared than versus Guinevere. We don't have a lot of tools to work with at this point, but thankfully in Ambret Town, we're able to get the TM for Rock Smash, which is quad effective versus Amora. If we would have had huge power, that would have been a one-hit KO, but instead we do half of Amora's health and get paralyzed by Thunder Wave. This means we also have to take some extra unnecessary damage from Aurora Beam before finishing Amora off with a second Rock Smash. We then face Tyrant, my all-time favorite 6th generation Pokemon, and for once, Grant actually gets to use his strategy as intended, going for Stomp after Amora paralyzed Finland. I don't end up getting Paraflinch the first turn, but for whatever reason Tyrant switches up to Bite, which which ends up working out for the flinch. I don't even know why Tyrant's going for Bite instead of Stomp, since Stomp does neutral damage instead of resisted and has a chance to flinch with 100% accuracy. But I guess I've got no right to complain about his strategy when he ends up getting 3 paraflinches in a row. After that, Grant starts using his brain cells together and goes for Stomp, but this time he doesn't end up flinching. However, since I can't seem to get a defense drop with Rock Smash, that doesn't seem to matter too much for him. He even gets me low enough to the point where I'm forced to switch. And I guess Grant is just omniscient, because as I swap to B-Barrel, he switches it up to Rock Tomb. Not only does this do massive damage, but because of B-Barrel's simple ability, it lowers my speed 2 stages. I'm then dealt massive damage by Stomp, but because B-Barrel is a god, I don't end up getting flinched, and with Bulldoze that I picked up in Lumio City, we can easily reduce what's left of Tyrant's health and claim our second gym badge. We then press on to Route 10, where I get another encounter I can't use until it evolves, Eevee. This leads us into a brutal section of the game for our water types. Basically, from this point onwards in the game, we have a rival fight before and after every single gym in the game. And because we're only using water types, this creates a massive problem since Serena has the grass starter. Meowstic goes down easily enough, but Quilladin is a different story. We're not low enough that a non-crit Needle Arm will take us out, so instead Quilladin opts for Bite, which doesn't end up flinching, so I get a speed drop with Rock Tomb. Getting this drop is excellent, since I now outspeed with B-Barrel. That said, Needle Arm still does a ton of damage, taking B-Barrel into the red immediately upon switching in. I go for a headbutt, and for the first time in the run, I get a lucky break with a flinch. A second one gets Quilladin into the yellow, but unfortunately, I'm not quite as lucky the second turn, and B-Barrel bites the dust. And with 5 more Serena battles remaining, I was afraid of this becoming a pattern. Unfortunately, without huge power, Finland can't finish off Quilladin. However, she is able to tank 1 Needle Arm, so for now, we've neutralized the threat. Having lost so many Pokemon, I'm gonna need a few more before we press on, so I backtrack a bit now that I have strength to pick up a Water Stone and thus evolve Eevee into Vaporeon. And our new evolution actually makes the gym fight versus Karina completely trivial. With Vaporeon's massive bulk and no weakness to fighting, we can easily withstand a ton of hits and fire back with Aurora Beam. This way, we easily beat Hawlucha and soon after claim our badge. What I'm really afraid of are the upcoming rival fights, as well as the 2 next gyms versus Grass and Electric respectively. But first, we can get a big boost of the team since this guy on Route 12 gives us a free Lapras. I then go fishing with the Good Rod in Azure Bay, and this can give us 2 things, either Remoraid or what I end up pulling, Chinchou. And this next stretch of the game is where things get really scary. Both before the Grass Gym and after the Electric Gym, we've got a rival fight. And that's on top of those gyms being the worst matchups in the game for us already. Once again, I can pretty easily take out Meowstic, but this time, Wartortle can't take a hit from Quilladin. I don't have a lot of great options here, so I decide to switch to Finland, who can actually take a Needle Arm and survive with over half HP. Then I guess because Quilladin doesn't see a KO, it goes for Bite instead, which ends up flinching. But even after that chip damage, we're still able to survive a Needle Arm and do some pretty pitiful damage back with Rock Smash that actually gets the defense drop. I then switch to Lapras, really hoping Needle Arm won't do over half, but for some reason Quilladin goes for Bite even though Needle Arm would have taken out Finland. But of course, the next Needle Arm flinches me. I have no choice but to just stay in, and to my surprise, Scotland manages to survive Needle Arm. But with no ice moves to fire back with at this level, all I can do is Body Slam, which doesn't do too much damage. There's only one hope for me left, and thankfully as I swap in Vaporeon, Quilladin goes for Bite. This gives me the opportunity to fire off an Aurora Beam and take Quilladin out the following turn without any casualties. I then swap to Lantern after Vaporeon gets to low enough health from a critical hit to take out Absol and finish the fight. But this just gets us access to our next problem, Leader Ramos. As strange as it feels to utter this next sentence, Ramos actually poses a threat to us. Thankfully, we've got one new tool to make things a little bit easier. While Jumpluff does a ton of damage with Grass Knot, Scotland learned Ice Beam at level 33, just in time for the level cap. The quad effective hit easily takes out Jumpluff. Ramos then sends in Weepin' Bell, which we outspeed, and because it's a Weepin' Bell, we just take it out with the Stab super effective hit. We then have to take his Go-Goat, which can actually take Scotland out from this range of health, so I've got to swap out. As I swap in Finland, Go-Goat ends up going for Bulldoze, which doesn't do a lot of damage, but it lowers our speed. Instead of just spamming grass moves, Go-Goat decides to go for Takedown, which doesn't do that much damage, and giving me a window to go for Rock Smash and hopefully lower its defense. It then misses its second takedown, giving me a much bigger window to retaliate than I necessarily deserve. The third one, however, gets Finland extremely low with a critical hit, and my non-huge power returns are extremely pathetic, even after the defense drop from Rock Smash. I switch Finland out and send in her neighbor Denmark, and unfortunately, Go-Goat is just in range of being healed with a Hyper Potion. Thankfully, Vaporeon saves me a bit of time by immediately getting a critical hit and taking Go-Goat below half with a Roar Beam. Because I was faster, Go-Goat goes for Bulldoze to lower my speed in order to outspeed me the following turn, but the recoil damage from Takedown actually puts Go-Goat in range of being taken out by a Roar Beam, conveniently awarding me my 4th gym badge without too much trouble. This immediately thrusts us into our next problem area, the Electric Gym. Thankfully, we've got a secret weapon in Lantern's Volt Absorb. This basically makes every gym trainer that only has one Pokemon a non-threat, making it extremely easy to get through the trainer gauntlet that leads us to Clement. His level cap also conveniently lets us evolve our starters into Greninja and the very non-steel type Blastoise. And Clement, despite us having Volt Absorb Lantern, is definitely not free. While Lantern can certainly wall Emolga, once Clement uses an electric move to figure out that Lantern has Volt Absorb, we're in big trouble. Sure, I deal some damage with Surf, but then Clement pulls a 500 IQ play. By assuming I'll go for Surf again, he swaps out into Heliolisk, which has dry skin, meaning it's immune to water-type moves. On top of that, not only am I facing an electric type with Thunderbolt that's immune to water-type moves, it has Grass Knot. On top of that, it's faster than all of my Pokemon except for Greninja. Sadly, this is bad news for Thick Fat Azumarill, who gets sacrificed so that we can send in Blastoise. And by Mega Evolving Blastoise, we can increase his special defense by 10 points and his attack by 20. We don't actually gain any speed upon Mega Evolving, but base Blastoise has just enough speed that our plan might work. We end up tanking a Grass Knot even though Thunderbolt would have done a ton more damage, and then we fight back with Bulldoze to lower Heliolisk's speed. With our boosted Mega Attack, Bulldoze does over half, and because of the speed drop, we can outspeed the following turn to take care of Heliolisk. Finally, we have to face Magneton, which loves to boost the power of its electric-type moves with electric terrain, but we don't care about that at all since Sweden is immune with Volt Absorb. So all we've got to do is fire off a couple of Surfs against this sitting duck to claim our 5th gym badge. Oh yeah, he's still got that annoying Emolga. Just a second and problem solved. But even with Clement defeated, we're not out of the woods. Because as soon as we enter Route 14, we've got another fight with Serena. Because we now have a dark type in Greninja, it's much easier to face Meowstic, but our only dark type move is Thief, so it gets to set up Light Screen. This is terrible since all of our Pokemon are special attackers, and we now have to face a fully evolved Chestnut. I don't have much of a choice. Without a Pokemon that even resists grass, I'm forced to make a sacrifice to get a safe switch. You might think sacrificing Lantern is a terrible idea here since it's my only resistance to electric. But not only can I get another resistance to electric extremely soon, we also face like 2 more electric types throughout the entire game. And because we've beaten the electric type gym, Lantern's usefulness has pretty much fallen off a cliff. I use my free switch on Lapras, who can outspeed Chestnut and do a little under half damage because of Light Screen. Chestnut decides to bite me, however I would have survived Seed Bomb at full health. And because this was the last turn of Light Screen, I can fire off another Ice Beam and easily take Chestnut out for another costly victory. The other reason why losing Lantern isn't too bad is because literally on the same route, we can guarantee to pick up Quagsire. This not only gives us that counter to electric with a ground type, but also a physical attacker. This ends up coming in very handy as we take on Valerie. With my new ground type, I can easily take out her steel type Mawile. Then when she sends in her female Mr. Mime, I swap to my specially defensive tank Vaporeon and take it out with a few Surfs. This just leaves her own evolution Sylveon, so after firing off a Surf, I decide to swap to Scotland. From there, it's a quick and easy few turns before we collect our 6th gym badge. This means we have to take on the Pokeball Factory, where the boss has one of the few remaining electric types. But with Quagsire, it doesn't end up being a problem. I can't say this multi-battle went as well for Serena, though. We then make our way to Route 15 to pick up our next encounter, the Grass-type Lombre. I then head south to Route 16 to pick up the Super Rod and fish up Poliwhirl. I can then buy a couple of Water Stones in Lumiose to evolve them into Ludicolo and a slightly slightly angrier Poliwhirl. And if you thought this game had any chill at all, well, you'd be wrong, because we have to face Serena again before we take on the next gym. As usual, Meowstic is no challenge at all, and we run into big trouble as soon as she sends in Chestnut. I decide to swap to Ludicolo, who takes neutral damage from Seed Bomb, thinking that would be my best bet, but we actually take over half. At this point, I'm basically in panic mode since there's nothing I can switch in, so I send in Denmark, hoping to tank one and then outspeed. And while I'm able to survive the Seed Bomb, Chestnut has 4 levels on Denmark and thus outspeeds to take me out. I knew Vaporeon was going down, I was just hoping to get a free Aurora Beam. Unfortunately, Chestnut outspeeds Scotland too and takes him below half health. I'm actually worried about just losing the attempt here, but Lapras pulls out a freeze at the exact right moment. Without the freeze, I would have just had to sacrifice another Pokemon, and at this point, we're actually kind of running low on encounters. The game, however, felt my freeze luck was just a little bit too good. So even though I avoided losing a second Pokemon against Chestnut, in the end, Absol managed to get us there anyway. With Blastwa at full health to finish off Absol, and Lapras able to take out Vaporeon with Thunderbolt through Gen 1 privilege, the rest of the fight ends up going fairly smoothly, but at this point, Serena's responsible for half of our fallen comrades. To make matters worse, we immediately have to go up against the next gym leader, now without a full team, but luckily, this is a Psychic gym, and our starter's a Dark type. At this point in the game, I don't really have a lot of good items, so I gave Greninja the King's Rock that we get from Lysander in Lumio City, and it actually ends up working out, getting the flinch the first turn against Sigilyph. Not only does this mean we take no damage versus Sigilyph, we also waste both of Olympia's Hyper Potions, meaning she can't heal for her next 2 Pokemon. Her Slowking can't really do damage to us, but it can be extremely annoying. On top of that, it will survive a single Night Slash and then go for Yawn. And because we don't want Greninja falling asleep at the end of the next turn when we take Slowking out, I have to pull out a little trick. Because Greninja's a Dark type, Slowking is never gonna go for Psychic, so I can freely swap to Poliwrath. As you just saw, Slowking still goes for Yawn, even though it had already yawned before, so Poliwrath is the perfect pivot since it makes Slowking go for Psychic. This way, we take no damage when swapping back to Greninja, and we can take Slowking out without being drowsy. Finally, we face Meowstic, but we have so much experience taking this thing out against Serena that it poses no threat at all. The worst it can do is send a resisted Shadow Ball at us, but instead she opts to go for a Calm Mind, which just allows me to take her out the following turn to claim our 7th gym badge. And this is kind of where our water types come into their own, because after the 7th gym, Serena would like to challenge us to another battle. However, thankfully, Lysander interrupts with his plan to end the world. This is a perfect spot for our water types to be. We now only have 1 Serena fight left in the game in Victory Road, and the first couple Lysander fights are a piece of cake. Because the level cap for the final gym is so high, we can afford to be fairly overleveled for these fights. This means for the first 2, we've got like 10 levels on the guy, making the fights a walk in the park. It's only in the final fight when he decides to become a fusion of Thanos and Dr. Octopus that his ace Pokemon actually gets close to us in level. His other mons don't stand a chance. With an odd incense boosted extrasensory, we can easily take out Mienshao. As for Pyroar, we simply wash it away with a Surf. We don't have anything to hit Honchkrow super effectively, but neither does Honchkrow against us. There's no chance we fall to Aerial Ace, so we simply take it out with a second Surf. This leaves Lysander with Gyarados, and while Mega Gyarados is a powerhouse that isn't quad weak to Thunderbolt, as soon as I saw Lysander lock himself into Outrage, I knew victory was mine. Even a crit on the second hit wouldn't have taken Scotland out, and I can then go for Perish Song. From there, it was simply a matter of swapping in 3 of my healthy Pokemon to wait out Perish Song and watch Gyarados' health drop to 0. Easiest Lysander fight of my life. With Lysander defeated, I decide to acquire some new Pokemon, starting with Whiscash on Route 18. I then have a brief confrontation with the final gym leader, which goes about as easily as you'd expect versus the weakest type in the game. But we've never been too afraid of the gym leaders, and in Victory Road, we still have one final battle with the main threat. Serena has taken 4 Pokemon from us, and at this point, we're running out of good water-type encounters to pick up in the game, so we really want to avoid losing any Pokemon if possible. After I defeat Meowstic, as per usual, she sends in Altaria, which gets completely destroyed by Ice Beam that we just picked up from Wolfric. It's then we for the final time face Chestnut. If I can get Ludicolo in for free, I know I can win the matchup as long as I don't get crit. Unfortunately, this does involve another sacrifice, and sadly for Whiscash, it's last in, first out. This does kinda suck since I now don't have a ground type going into the Elite Four, but I really can't afford to lose any of my other 5 Pokemon. This time around, Ludicolo is able to tank a Seed Bomb without taking over half health, and with the acquisition of Ice Beam, we're able to fire back with over 50% for the 2-hit KO. And with Chestnut defeated for the final time, we can easily take out Absol with a couple of power-up punches, which then sets us up perfectly to quickly finish off our Vaporeon. Now that we've defeated Serena for the final time, we need to make our preparations for the Elite Four. My first order of business is to surf in Solage City, where we can either pick up Wailmer or Tentacool. It doesn't matter which one we get, since we can only get the two in Ambrit Town as well, which guarantees our Tentacool pickup because of Dupe's Claws. This means our Elite Four squad ends up being Japan the Greninja with Surf, Dark Pulse, Ice Beam, and Extrasensory. France, the Mega Blastoise with Water Pulse, Flash Cannon, Dark Pulse, and Focus Blast. Mexico, the Ludicolo with Surf, Energy Ball, Ice Beam, and Fake Out. Scotland, the Lapras with Surf, Ice Beam, Thunderbolt, and Perish Song. Spain, the Poliwrath with Waterfall, Brick Break, Earthquake, and Power Up Punch. And finally, our newest member, Portugal the Tentacruel with Surf, Ice Beam, Sludge Wave, and Toxic Spikes. Despite all of our major setbacks, we made it all the way to the Elite Four, and I decided to tackle Malva first since it's our best matchup in the game. It's always nice to have one Elite Four matchup that's pretty much free. In this case, Malva's brigade of fire types isn't exactly equipped to handle a squad full of water types. I start by washing away her Pyroar in one hit, which leads her to send in her ace Talonflame. The bird is faster, and we end up taking a boatload of damage from Brave Bird. A critical hit there would admittedly have been incredibly crippling for the rest of the Elite Four, but this way we can take out Talonflame simply without even switching, and then wash away both Torkoal and Chandelure with a Surf each. And with the first member of the Elite Four defeated, we move on to the much more challenging three that remain. I decide to challenge Wickstrom, the Master of Steel types, first. He leads with a tricky Klefki as I send in Mega Blastoise. Klefki doesn't start with any prankster shenanigans, however, instead just genuinely outspeeding and hitting me with Dazzling Gleam before I fire off a Mega Launcher Water Pulse. Klefki then sets up a single layer of spikes before I fire the second Water Pulse to take it out. Probopass comes out next, and because it has Sturdy, I know I can't one-hit KO it. I also have enough health that even a critical hit from Discharge wouldn't matter. And fortunately, I don't even end up getting paralyzed. Wickstrom predictably full restores, giving me a chance to get Probopass into the red again with another Water Pulse. Just like versus Olympia, this chain of events baits Wickstrom into using all of his full restores as I get to take out Probopass for free, which is what I would certainly call a double W. And with Probopass defeated, we have Wickstrom's two most dangerous Pokemon left to face. Admittedly, France is at pretty low health here when facing off against Aegislash. However, Wickstrom's Aegislash is a physical attacker, and Mega Blastoise has some of the best physical defense in the game. But I don't end up having to deal with Aegislash since Dark Pulse gets a flinch, allowing me to just finish Aegislash off the following turn with a second one. Wickstrom's final Pokemon is Scizor, one of the greatest Mons of all time. But because it's a physical attacker, I decide to stay in and launch a Water Pulse, dealing over half damage before it hits me with an X-Scissor, taking me down to just 17 HP and forcing me to swap out. I send in Poliwrath, who takes a bit of spike damage before eating a Bullet Punch that barely does more than the spikes. To my surprise, Poliwrath actually outspeeds and falls short of the KO with a Waterfall. This isn't that big a problem though, since Scizor only has resisted moves, allowing me to safely tank another hit and take it out the following turn with a Waterfall for our second Elite Four victory. Third, I face Drasna, whose dragons are generally a problem since Dragon resists water. She leads with Dragalge, and my best specially defensive tank is Portugal. The fact that all of our Pokemon can learn Ice Beam makes this matchup a lot more bearable. Thunderbolt is a massive threat, and unfortunately, Dragalge is so specially bulky that 2 Ice Beams puts it in healing range, and 2 Thunderbolts unfortunately puts us way below half. Drasna then goes for a full restore as I go for Ice Beam, and while it can't do half damage, I do manage to pull off a freeze. This freeze does let me hit Dragalge once for free, once again putting it in healing range. But unfortunately, the full restore of course heals the freeze, so I don't get to keep my advantage. The fact that I do seem to have just enough health to be able to survive another Thunderbolt, however, still means the freeze made a massive difference since it allowed me to burn both of Drasna's full restores and thus being able to pick off Dragalge with Tentacruel without needing to switch. Second out is Altaria, and even though Ice Beam is quad effective, I wasn't sure if a non-stab Ice Beam from Tentacruel's base 80 special attack would be enough to take it out. So instead of risking it, I swapped to Scotland to tank this Dragon Pulse. Fortunately, Altaria is kind enough to not go for Sing on either either the switch or the turn after, giving me a free chance to fire off a stab Ice Beam, which is going to be more than enough to take it out. Third is Druddigon, and here it looks like I take an incredibly stupid risk, but in fact, I just kind of forgot that Druddigon has revenge. So I accidentally give Druddigon a power boost by outspeeding it, and then somehow survive on 15 HP. But even though this meant I could take out Druddigon the next turn with an Ice Beam, I was about to make an even bigger mistake. With such little health remaining, I knew I couldn't stay in against Noivern. The bulkiest Pokemon I have on the team is Blastoise, but as soon as I swapped him in, I realized my massive blunder. Even though Blastoise is the perfect Pokemon here, able to tank hits for days, getting even bulkier as I Mega Evolve, I'd forgotten to teach him Ice Beam between the fights. This is incredibly bad since I didn't go into the fight with an actual backup plan, so the best I could do is swap in Greninja and hope Noivern doesn't do overhack. Never mind, we've just got outspeed. But sadly, Noivern is both higher level and has higher base speed. Except Noivern gets a low roll that somehow doesn't take Greninja out, and we finish the fight with an Ice Beam. I was prepared to go on without Greninja, but it's a relief to not have to. Our final Elite Four battle is to decide who the real Water-type Master of Kalos is. Seabold doesn't have any Pokemon that can remove Toxic Spikes, so I can freely set them up the first turn and just tank a Dragon Pulse. Tentacruel is the best Mon for the job here since it's got the highest special defense on my team, and I can heal up with Black Sludge. Then every other turn, I make sure to go for Protect just to maximize recovery. From there, I set up my second layer of Toxic Spikes, after which I start going for Sludge Wave. Clawitzer is an incredibly specially bulky Pokemon, so even a move as strong as Sludge Wave can't take it below half. After a third Protect, I've recovered enough HP to survive a fourth Dragon Pulse. Unfortunately, the Sludge Wave damage is just enough to put Clawitzer in healing range, putting me at a similar disadvantage as versus Dragalge. However, exactly like when facing Dragalge, Tentacruel has something up his sleeve, this time inflicting poison instead of freeze, and the poison damage is just enough to get Clawitzer below half. This means I can safely go for Protect the following turn to get some more recovery and, more importantly, the poison damage, thus guaranteeing that a second Sludge Wave does enough damage to take Clawitzer out. Gyarados comes in second, and despite being kind of an honorary flying type, it still doesn't get poisoned by Toxic Spikes. Because Tentacruel is super dead to Earthquake, I swap into Scotland, who can tank it comfortably. Gyarados sets up a Dragon Dance to boost its attack and speed, which lets me hit it for free with a Thunderbolt, not quite taking it out. This baits out Seabold's second full restore, so I go for a stab Ice Beam, dealing just enough damage that Thunderbolt will take it out. Gyarados then does its best with a +1 Earthquake, but without it being super effective, Lapras barely takes anything, and we finish Gyarados out with a second Thunderbolt. Third out is his ace Barbaracle, and being an Ice type, Scotland is incredibly weak to this thing's Stone Edge, so I'm forced to switch out, sending in Mexico. This, however, does not exactly go to plan, since Stone Edge does a ton more damage than I expected without even being a critical hit. So the best I can do with Ludi is go for Fake Out to get a little bit of extra poison damage, and because Barbaracle's faster, I'm just forced to swap out, sending in Spain. Poliwrath is kind of the perfect Pokemon for this situation, since we can resist the X-Scissor on the switch, and the worst thing Barbaracle can do to us is go for a non-stab Cross Chop, which wouldn't be a problem even if it crit. Sure, Poliwrath's disappointing attack stat isn't enough to take Barbaracle out, but that's exactly why we set up Toxic Spikes. What makes Poliwrath even more perfect here is it being a fighting type and thus baiting out Psychic from Starmie, meaning it's completely safe to swap in our Dark type. Psychic simply has no way of hurting us, and we can one-hit KO Starmie with a stab Dark Pulse, thus spelling the end for the Elite Four, which means we only have one foe remaining. The only thing standing between us and total victory is Champion Diantha. And just like Seabold, she doesn't have any poison types, meaning she's got no way to get rid of Toxic Spikes. On top of that, Tentacruel is kind of the perfect counter to Hawlucha. Flying Press does some pitiful damage to us, and we set up our spikes. Realizing she needs more damage, Diantha decides to double her attack stat with a Swords Dance, giving me a free turn to set up the second layer of Toxic Spikes. She then tries her luck at Flying Pressing, but ends up missing, giving me another free attack, taking out half her health with Ice Beam. Finally, once I've gotten nearly all my health back from Black Sludge, she hits Flying Press. But even with her attack stat doubled, we could have still taken both hits. I then connect with a second Ice Beam, finishing off the bird. Second out is Aurorus, which of course gets poisoned immediately. This thing is a pretty big problem for us, since it loves to set up screens, which will greatly reduce our damage output. This means a second Surf isn't enough to take Aurorus out, and just to make matters worse, of course it's got Thunder. Obviously it hits, because why would the AI ever miss a 70% accurate move, taking me all the way down to 40 HP, and thankfully Eventually, toxic damage is ramped up enough that we take Aurorus out at the end of the turn. Even so, Light Screen is still in effect to reduce our damage. So as Diantha sends in Tyrantrum, I decide to swap out into Spain. Tyrantrum goes for Head Smash, which we would have resisted anyway, but actually misses. We then get this rare interaction where Brick Break actually destroys screens, even though Light Screen isn't actually a problem for our only physical attacker. We then tank a Dragon Claw pretty well since Poliwrath is surprisingly bulky, and finish Tyrantrum off with a second Brick Break. This brings in Diantha's Grass type, Gourgeist. It starts by going for Trick or Treat, which adds the Ghost type to my Water Fighting typing. The only reason I stayed in was to see what type of damage I could do with Poison Jab, which is absolutely pitiful. On top of that, Gourgeist is already poisoned, so the amount of value I can get from Poison Jab is diminishing. Even so, I decide to try for a second one as Gourgeist just goes for Phantom Force. Because Diantha's locked into the move, this gives me a completely safe switch to Greninja since I'll take resisted damage from Phantom Force. I then fire off an Ice Beam to finish Gourgeist off. As Diantha sends in Goodra, I know I can't knock it out in one hit, so I decide to swap out into Portugal. Goodra then proceeds to miss a Focus Miss because that's what Focus Miss does. I then proceed to try and damage it with Ice Beam, which despite being super effective, does despicably low damage. But Tentacruel is just especially bulky and I manage to survive the incoming Dragon Pulse. I then go for a Surf, which might seem odd since it's resisted and barely does any damage at all. However, Ice Beam combined with the poison damage would take Goodra into healing range, which is exactly the opposite of what I want. Tentacruel's noble sacrifice lets me bring in Lapras, and somehow Diantha actually focus hits, dealing quite a bit of damage since it's super effective. I am able to take out Goodra with an Ice Beam, but taking all that damage is not great, since I need Lapras to have as much HP as possible for my plan to work out. Once she sends in her Ace Gardevoir and Mega Evolves to boost its power, she'll hit me with a super effective Thunderbolt. But even after taking a Focus Miss to the face, Lapras manages to survive, meaning I can carry out my master plan of singing Gardevoir's Song of Demise. With no other Pokemon left for Diantha to switch to, and more than 3 Pokemon remaining in my party, it doesn't matter if Gardevoir manages to one-hit every Pokemon I send in, which is actually kinda what happens. Both Lapras and Poliwrath get absolutely clapped. And with one turn of the song remaining, I send in Blastoise, who despite somehow not being a Steel type in my hour of need against this Fairy type, gets a single moment of glory despite getting paralyzed by Thunderbolt, where he flexes on Gardevoir by connecting with a completely unnecessary Focus Miss just before Lapras's song comes to a screeching halt, and taking with it the remainder of Gardevoir's health to crown us champions of the Kalos League. And so, despite all the problems I'd had along the way, I'd done it. I beat a Pokémon X Hardcore Nuzlocke using only water types. And it was a lot harder than I expected it to be. Water is one of the best types in the game. But despite that, the game gave me a whole lot of trouble. What I love about Nuzlockes is using Pokemon you don't usually use. And I don't think I've ever even thought about bringing a Poliwrath to the Pokemon League, but sometimes gotta be the first. And until we see each other next time, subscribe.